Welcome to the Berlin Drawing Room.
Then, first I'll just introduce myself to those of you that are new here, and just one quick note, what I would say, because I think there are a lot of people that are very friendly normally in these classes. If you have technical problems still, I would recommend that you ask people for some advice in the chat box, because other people in the class might be able to answer your questions, because I won't be able to probably stop and do technical coaching like throughout the entire class. Okay, so my name is Mira, and I am an artist, and I am also the founder of the Berlin Drawing Room, and I also teach botanical watercolor. So I'm delighted to have you here with me to paint a toadstool today. So we have a special specimen for the class. I blew it, and I would say that we get right to it. So I'm going to spotlight my desk view. I did a painting from the specimen already just to get prepared for the class. So just to say a couple of things about this mushroom, this is actually one of my favorite mushrooms. It's called Lepista nuda, or the common name is bluet, and grows quite a bit around here in northern Germany where I am. And I think it's pretty widespread in the UK and North America. So hopefully it's something that you might even come across. It's really noteworthy for its beautiful purple color, although not all of the bluets that you find have this purple color. Sometimes the caps also get more beige, especially when they dry out or they're a little bit older. And a couple of things in terms of their identification that are noteworthy in terms of the drawing. They have these very particular gills that are called Sinueit Gills. So I'll hold this up a little bit so you can see more closely. So there's this little notch at the base here, which I've tried to detail in my painting. Details like that, although quite small, are important when you're painting a mushroom, because you want them, those are some of the very small details, like the type of gill shape, that are also useful in terms of identification. And I think one of the goals of drawing and painting a specimen can be like really getting to know the identifying features, so that it might be something you could even identify out in the field or gain more confidence in your identification. Is anybody familiar with this mushroom? Have you ever found it before?
No.
Well, once you're aware of it, you might notice it more next time. And another thing, it's got this swollen base. So that's another identifying feature. And I've chosen this composition because I think it's important that you see the top of the cap, see the shape of the top of the cap, and you see the gills. And this cap, it just happened to have this slight deformity, which I thought gave it also compositional interest. And like, I don't know, I found it kind of cute, actually. So I actually found these mushrooms, and I ate them. So I already have quite And Giorgio knows what's up. Yeah, one of his favorite, one of your favorite mushrooms. Yeah, I love these. I think one of the things I love the most about them, and that I think is the best identifying feature of this mushroom, however, is the smell. And that's really one of the things, like, this is a online class, so we're all going to paint together from the photographs that I took of the specimen that I found. But I would really encourage you, even if you don't want to eat them, when you go out in the forest and you look at mushrooms, to smell them, because it's really one of they have very distinctive smells oftentimes, and this one is really known for its smell. And the best way I can describe it is a kind of an earthy lilac with undertones of carrion, which is like rotting flesh, a fancy word for rotting flesh. It's a beautiful smell. I mean, you know, the musk smell that's in most perfumes, I think this on its own, it also has a bit this like of this a little bit this carry-on scent, in my opinion. So I think scent is very subjective. So it's like whenever I see writing about identifying this mushroom, they always mention the scent, but like the way that other people describe the scent, I'm always like, no, that's not it at all. So I think maybe the way that different people experience these aromas, maybe it's different. I don't know. Giorgio, how would you describe the smell of this mushroom? In any case, it's extremely specific. Once you know it, you'll always know it. So in that regard, it's good for identification. So yeah, you can just try to imagine the smell while we're painting. So I have included 3 photos because the first one is basically the composition, and then the other 2 are details of each individual mushroom. And I think it just helps to really see them up close to get the details. So actually, if I am doing a botanical illustration from photographs, that's actually something that I'll often do. I'll very often work from multiple photographs and then the painting becomes a composite of that. So in this case, it's like the 2 additional photos are helping with the composition. Are giving details to the composition, but like in other cases, I'll also take from different photographs different details or different features to sort of get the perfect specimen. So that's often the case when you're working from photographs, is you need a small collection and not just one. So the first thing you need to do is to create a line drawing of the composition, and you want to add as much detail as you can, only using lines. So this is partially finished. I just, since I'll be also explaining, I wanted to get a head start, but you can start working on this now. I've used an H pencil directly on my hot press. That means smooth watercolor paper. And I've used an H pencil because I want the lines to be quite light. And so an H pencil is quite hard. So a lighter line. But if you don't have an H pencil, just use the pencil that you have and just try not to press too hard on the paper so that you don't leave too dark of a line. So the first thing that you want to do, the first thing you want to do is get just the overall shape of the cap, the elliptical shape, and then you start to add in the details. So same here, like first get the overall shape and then go to the level of the details. And so mine is just at the point where I'm starting to fill in the gills. And I wanted to leave it at this point so that you would be able to see how I do it. But I'll just hold this up for a minute so you could see a little bit more closely what I've done so far. So I start with this when I start doing the gills. So this is that one gill that's kind of defines the shapes of the other gills, and it's before it flips perspective. You'll sort of can see what I mean on the photograph. So I start with this particular gill that's going to give me the shape of the underside of the cap. And I've done that on both sides. But then there's this additional shape here, the gills that you see kind of in a different perspective, more foreshortened, that are on the other side of the cap, basically, that you're seeing from the other side. So there's this additional shape here. And you can see how like all the gills up until this point are ending at the base. And here they flip and they actually end at this outer gill, at this one. So it's just a perspectival thing. You've got this sort of final gill here defining the shape, and then all the gills in here, they're ending at the base, but these actually, from a different perspective, they end at this gill. Then in the middle, you'll see there's basically one gill that you're seeing just the very front edge of. So I draw that one to give a point of perspective in the center. And then you start adding gills going out from there. So I think like it's quite helpful. Make sure you get this little curve, that's the Sinueit shape, and then going out from there.
Well, you put it again in the oven.
Yeah.
And sometimes you might want to do some gills, like not always right next to each other, but say like we could put one kind of here, and then that helps to see what you need to fill in. And then what you'll notice from the photograph is that there are some gills that don't actually make it all the way down, and then you can fill those in between here. And then we've got that perspectival shift here. So I'm actually not going to start at the very edge because I'm going to start kind of where I want it to end up, a bit in the middle. I think it just makes it easier for me to see it that way. Do a few here, do a few here. And then I find it just much easier to fill in between when I've spaced them out like that. You want to make sure that you don't make them too even. You want to have some irregularity. And when you look at the photograph, there's definitely quite a bit of irregularity. So you want to have that feeling that it's organic. If you make it like everything just completely perfect and evenly spaced, it'll give it a kind of like plastic, kind of mechanical feeling. Here, there's even like area you can see that goes behind the stem. So it's not just sitting like on top of the stem goes up into the gills a little bit. Make sure you get that accurately. Here, I've just very loosely, in comparison to the style that I've used for the gills, I've just very loosely sketched some of the debris that was attached to the base of the mushroom. And then on the cap on this one, I've just very loosely sketched in a little bit these inner shapes just to help guide me in the painting process, even though those aren't necessarily like hard lines that you can see in the photo. And then you can erase any extra lines that you have, places where you adjusted or changes. You can just erase the extra lines a little bit. Okay, so my drawing is pretty much good to go, I think. It's a bit hard to see on the camera because the drawing is very light, but that's the way that I want it to be for watercolor painting. If any of this is like really overwhelming to somebody, or you think like this will take me forever, it's also fine if you just do one of the mushrooms. Maria, the mycologist, are you here by any chance? maybe she's not here. Next week, we're starting a fungi botanical watercolor workshop. And I have a mycologist joining for that, but I guess she didn't make it to today's class. Okay. So if you're still working on your drawing, that's totally fine, but I'm going to move on a bit to start working on the painting. So I'll just explain a couple of things first. So you're going to need your watercolors, and you're going to need a paper towel. Like you'll need at least a medium and a smaller sized round brush. And you'll need a place to test your colors. One of the really important things with watercolors is being able to control the amount of water on your brush. For different techniques, we're going to use a couple of techniques with different amounts of water on the brush. So the paper towel is actually not just to clean the brush, but it's actually to control the amount of, help you control the water, the amount of the water. And just make sure that you also have a separate area, like, I mean, this is, we're not using so many colors, so this is already enough space. But make sure you have space to mix your colors. Okay, so I am going to be using a layered approach where we focus on different parts of the composition in different layers. So I think that this is a good way to approach watercolor because you don't need to be totally perfectionistic every time because the image is coming about through a process of layering. And we can be more selective in our focus on each individual layer. So right now I'm mixing a purple. I am using alizarin crimson and cobalt blue. If you don't have cobalt blue, you can also use French ultramarine blue. It's just as good. Since these are mushrooms and they also have some brown tones, we're not necessarily striving towards like a crystal clear purple, which is more difficult to achieve through mixing. If your purple ends up being a little bit muddy, it's actually still going to work. So it's a case where the blue that you use is not as crucial. So I'm going to test this. I like this color. Might be actually add a little bit more blue. So this, I'm not trying to mix right now the color of the mushroom. I'm actually going to be using this color for the shadows. I like to use a cooler version of the color for the shadows. So actually, I'm quite happy with this. And now I need to dilute it more with water because it's very important with this layering approach that every single layer is transparent. Because what you get is the accumulation of all the layers forming one image. So that only happens if every layer is transparent. Okay, so I'm gonna make this, you know, I'm gonna make it even a little bit, I might make a second version of this, just actually, you know, put it somewhere else because I really want to add a little bit more water. Because with watercolor, you can always go darker, but you cannot go lighter again because the light source is always going to be the white of the paper. And my first layer is going to be a little bit looser. I might still want to go back and make changes later. So I'm just gonna block in these areas that are a little bit darker, where I also need to build up some contrast to show the form. I'm gonna use this bluish purple color. One thing that you do have to be careful of when you're painting from a photograph is that the shadows can appear more gray or black in photo than they would appear from a live specimen. So it's good to just have that in mind. And especially since we're painting from a photo and I know that that is a tendency, I'm just choosing like a quite vibrant color to start out with my shadows. And I know this is going to blend with some of the other colors I'm using for future layers. So that's just one of these things with watercolor that makes it unique with the layering process, is that it helps to have a plan for your painting, like knowing kind of what you're going to do a few layers out. So if it's new for you, that prospect could seem very challenging. So yeah, so I'm here to help you with that today, and in additional classes if you want that. And then, you know, with practice, you get a feeling for that, and then it starts to come more as an instinct. So you might notice that I'm not taking any particular care, like doing any kind of blending right now. I'm just painting directly, not softening edges or then leaving things relatively rough. And this is fine for this stage in the painting. One of the things that's kind of nice with the layering process is that you don't need to worry too much about blending, because the blending tends to happen like through the layering itself. So I quite like that because I find this layering process, I find like this idea of blending a bit tedious. So I quite like it that with this technique, it happens basically automatically. So I just want to point something out that's pretty important right here. This, even though it only occurs for just a little area. This lighter edge at the bottom of the cap is really important to preserve because you see it's creating like a contrast with that edge from the shadow on the stem to this other shadow on the cap where the cap is kind of curving, rolling over. And you can see it in the photograph too. It's subtle, but it's definitely there where this edge just has a little bit of light on it. So make sure that you preserve that. I'm gonna go a little darker, straight. Not maybe not the whole thing, but bit of shadow, a little more shadow here. Subtle. Also have the benefit of doing the painting, the sort of sample painting before the class. I kind of can see from my other painting some of these other shadows that I ended up developing more later in the painting, so I'll just bring them out already now. Okay, so this looks like kind of very splotchy at the moment, but that's totally fine. I'm just gonna give the same treatment now to the other mushroom with the gill view. Add one more. So see here how I've overlapped onto the shadow that I'd done previously that had dried. And now like you already have kind of this blending effect, but it's just through the layering. So that's kind of what I was talking about before. You can already see it starting to happen. We could do the same thing here. Here's a little bit darker, and even just using the same exact dilution of color, if you add a second layer, it's going to be darker. Like say right here, if I just wanted to add, it has to be dry in between though. That's the trick. Needs to be dry, and then you can already layer a little bit. See if I add a layer here, it just kind of blends in with what's there, but okay, so I'm using the close-up view of each mushroom so that I can really see the detail. So that's why I included those extra shots. Okay. I'm gonna leave a tiny bit of a lighter edge just right in this part as well, because I'm seeing that in the photo. Just right here at the edge. I think it's nice, but it's not as important as here because, you know, the gills are still going to add a lot of contrast from the top of the cap to the gills. So it's not as critical as here, but I think it's still nice to have. I'm gonna add a bit of shadow, just painting over my drawing here. We'll get to the gills in a minute. But I'm gonna do this more general shadow first. So I actually am going to just clean my brush, and I will blend this a little bit because it gets quite lighter down here towards the bottom. This is dry. I'm just gonna go overlap a little bit so that I get this blending effect, but that's just through the overlap. Maybe while it's still wet, just add a tiny bit of more paint to the top. Okay, I'm going to use a little bit smaller brush. The brush I'm using now, number 2. The brushes I'm using so far are synthetic sable brushes. Okay, let's see. I don't remember how strong this mixture was. Let me test it again. Because I want to use a little bit stronger for the gills, but you know, we're not gonna start out like full strength the way that you see them here, because I think it's quite nice to have this like not differentiation, like different levels of contrast when you look at the gills here. So like here it's more subtle, less contrast. Here it's quite strong contrast, and then here it's a little bit darker, but then again also a little bit less contrast. So in here it's more blue. So the first layer I'm gonna, but those are details that get drawn out later. So the first thing I want to do is just the more general layer. So that is quite nice. It's still the same purple color, but a little bit stronger than what I've used for the other shadows. And I'm just gonna follow along with my drawing. It's good to be like as accurate as you can, but it doesn't have to be completely perfect. And you know, you want to have this organic quality anyway. So I'm just making sure to leave some white in between. This area where I added the shadow already, I'm painting right over the top of that. So that's like the layering, right? When you have those layers, you don't paint around them, you just keep building the layers up. Just making sure I don't go over. Just getting to my center gill, but straight line. And I should have said before, like for these areas where you're painting small details, you just want to have a very, very tiny amount of paint on your brush. So that's why, like, I'm always actually, can you see that? I'm like always using this edge here to take the excess liquid off of my brush, because the drier your brush, like the more control that you have. If you're using a lot of water, then you won't be able to get into these small areas. So that could be something like if you're having trouble getting into these smaller, more detailed areas, you might have too much water on your brush. So I'm just dipping the very, very tip of my brush into the paint. I'm not dipping the whole brush. Okay. So while I'm using this shadow color, like that I used for the gills, I'm thinking that I can use the same exact paint for this texture on the stem. Actually, looking how I did it before, I think I added just like a tiny bit more red for that. Just made it a little bit warmer. So just add a little bit more of my crimson. Just gonna move this over here so that I have that sort of pinker, redder version, that it doesn't get mixed with everything else. Yeah, I think this is good. So it's just a little redder version of that purple. And yeah, because you know the way that the texture has those darker marks, we're going to use a dry brush technique. So you want to dry your brush off completely and then just get a little bit of paint on there. And then you're basically just gonna make these marks with the very edge of your brush, pressing as lightly as you can so that you get like a little bit of a texture. This is quite like a fun technique to have an excuse to use. If you've never done this before, you could test out this technique like on a separate piece of paper. And you might notice like as you're making these marks, as your brush gets drier, you can be a little bit more subtle with it. And then these lighter areas, maybe just save for when your brush is at its driest. Yeah, I mean, this can be quite fun. And then I think there are just some areas. It's a little bit more like this stringy kind of veiny texture as well. So just add some, using the same dry brush technique, just adding some longer, thinner marks, lines. Also, because you don't want to have like too much the same mark over and over again. And then while I'm here, I'm just going to like emphasize the blue or purple again, just emphasizing there's some quite dark shadow just right here where the gills attach. And yeah, like I was saying before, that's one of those details that I want to pay particular attention to with this mushroom for the identification purposes. So I'll just go back, pay a little attention to that. And I know that's going to be like one of the darkest parts of the whole painting. So I'm not worrying here about going too dark. Oh, I forgot these gills on this side. Oops. Okay, before I move on from the shadows, I'm just going to emphasize now everything is a little bit like same. So I just want to focus on a couple of areas that are quite a bit darker than everything else and just make sure that I remember to add more contrast there. So now I'm going in like with a much more concentrated version of the shadow color, but only in very, very selected areas. I'm not going over the whole thing. So up until now, like we're basically almost painting from a black and white version of the image because we're focusing on tonality. And yeah, which is just really key with watercolor painting. So in here, some of the darker shadows of the painting. So I'm being very selective where I add these darker areas. Definitely not just going back over everywhere where there's a shadow. And I can also add, same time, a bit of texture. I'm using that dry brush technique. Texture. I see the texture a little bit differently on this one, like more, a little smoother and maybe more lines. I could add some of this little scruffy marks as well, especially in lighter area. So yeah, this is the dry brush technique, where you're kind of like scratching the surface with your brush. Okay. So now I want to add some of the cap color. So I'm going to start with this purple again. And let's see, if I want to make my purple a little bit more brown, like the color that I'm seeing on the cat, does anybody know what color I would add to the purple? Leave your color wheels out and ready to look at.
Yellow?
No?
Yeah.
Orange?
Yeah, like a yellowish orange. So, yeah, you can start by adding some yellow. Just gonna use this color that I have right here, but just add a bit of yellow. And that's because it's the complementary color. So yeah, that's already looking quite a bit browner. Let's be a tad more red. And I'm gonna just, again, move some of that color down here so I can keep the color that I mixed for later, but adjust exactly how light. I want to start out pretty light with this. I might just make this a little bit warmer. I'm adding a little more yellow because I've gone so cool with the shadows. So this is actually in a way to compensate for that. Because layering is also a way of mixing color. So I'm painting over most of the mushroom cap. I'm just avoiding a couple of the lightest areas, really. Okay, I think we can use like a much lighter version of this color also for the gills. Maybe the gills will be a little bit more purple. Okay, so I'm going to use a really light color to go over the gills as well. I think I'm also just going to leave a little bit of white space for now with the gills in some areas, and so that I get this. I'll go back over it, and then some areas will be a little lighter, some areas will be a little darker. We're going to use this lighter version to go back over some of these areas that I left white here. So you see I'm going over the areas around them too, so that it doesn't just flatten out. So like now right here, this has 2 layers and this is 1 layer, even though it's sort of the same color. Now this looks darker, this looks lighter. I'm gonna add a little more blue for the stem. I'm seeing that as a cooler purple.
Flower. Karen started screen sharing with a flower.
Okay. I'm not sure how that happened.
I'm really sorry.
No problem. At least it was a flower and not a picture.
Not something.
I don't know what people like to look at. Leave this one area white. How are people doing? If you have any questions, feel free to ask.
Very difficult, maybe because I've never really looked at real mushrooms closely, whereas with flowers and leaves I have. So it's sort of very strange to do. I took a photo of what you've done, so that's what I'm using.
Mhm.
But very, very strange. I feel totally out in the depth.
Well, that's okay. If it's new for you, then congratulations that you tried
Yeah.
something new.
Yeah.
So I have another mixture here that is the purple that I was using before, combined also with some burnt sienna. If you have that color, I just thought it was a nice addition just to bring out some of the redder areas in this mushroom. So if you don't have burnt sienna, you could just make a little bit redder version of the purple just by adding more of the crimson. But I think it's nice, the top here, just adding a few places where you have this more like reddish brown. And now I'm adding it in an intentionally blotchy way, just to try to get a little bit of the texture that's on the cap here. Maybe there's places on this one as well. A little bit of extra color. There's like a little bit of pink in the stem here, I think, too. The pink is just adding more of the alizarin. And then I'm just using a clean brush to take away a little bit of the pink from this edge, blend it. It just adds a little bit more depth to be like mixing the colors in this way through the layering. And yeah, I haven't done anything yet to these leaves at the base, so I'm just going to take, so I've done something, I've actually mixed a different version of the purple that I use for my darkest darks. And I'm using for that phthalo blue, which is a very intense, much more intense compared to the cobalt or ultramarine blue. It's a staining color. It's a very intense blue, and it's a little bit of a greenish blue. So it's when you mix it with the alizarin crimson, it gets almost like blackish. And I mean, it's not a good color for layering, but it is a good color for accents and for creating almost like a more of a like a blackish purple. So you can see like how intense and dark that gets. So I'm actually going to use some of this like straight away because I want to have a different look and feel for the base and these like I did before. I've painted the bits of dirt and grass on here in a very loose style. So it's quite different than the way the mushrooms are painted. And so I'm not going to do as many layers, and we're going to do this quick. So I'm starting out like with just some really darks, and so I don't have to do as many layers. So this is just blocking in the very loose hand some of the shadows within these forms. Because I think they can be like even a little bit more abstract. You know, they're not the focal point, but you want to get like this rough texture of the, you know, the dirt and the leaves, but not necessarily like in precise detail. I think it's really fun to paint like these bits of grass sticking out and get to have like these more expressive lines. And yours doesn't have to look exactly like mine. You can do this in the kind of like your own style too. It's nice to do something a little looser, considering that we still have some work to do on those gills. So right now I'm going to use this much more intense, like more blackish purple to really just pop out, especially there are only really a couple of places with dark shadows here. So I definitely don't want to overdo that. I think I've already gone quite a bit darker in my painting than the photo, but you know, that's always a bit tricky because like the photo, I had to lighten the photo quite dramatically in order that you can clearly see all of the details. And now with the painting, it's like darker again. So I don't know, that's always a bit of a trade-off when you're working from a photo. You can probably tell that I've adjusted the light in the photo, you know, just to make this. So I'm not going over every gill with this darker color. I'm going to be a bit selective because like when you look at the photo, I mean, every single gill, it doesn't necessarily, like if you really look at it, there are only very few where you can see a solid continuous line reaching all the way from the base to the cap. I mean, just take a look and try it yourself. We know that all of the gills, actually, well, not all of them, because some of them don't make it all the way. We already said that, but like many of the gills, they do extend from the base to the cap. So there's our knowledge of the subject matter, but if you really look at the image and how we actually see it, very few of these gills are a solid continuous line. So if we paint them in the way that we know it and not in the way that we see it, our painting is not going to look naturalistic. It will look stylized. I mean, okay, this looks stylized anyway, but it will look like much more graphic representation. So it's just like important to be aware of that and pay attention to that. I think that's always just interesting, like the way that you know something to be, and then when you really look at it, like kind of in this with this artistic eye, kind of like trying to see it for the forms themselves, how different it actually can be from what you expected. Okay, so I'm going to go in now with my burnt sienna. I'm going to start off just with a very watery version of the burnt sienna because it really matches these leaves quite well. I'm just gonna go over filling in here. So now I'll just fill in a little bit in between, like just kind of adding some texture in there. The darker lines are going to provide the structure. So for this, I mean, I'm using the photograph in a looser way now. And so you just want to have a nice variety of texture. Going in there. Okay, so we're almost done here. I'm gonna add just a little bit more color onto the gills. I just think they stand out a little bit too much with the white. So I think I'm just going to do a very light purple, a bluer purple in some places, and then a pinker purple in other places. And you can see in the photo, I think quite clearly, that some areas are more blue when you're looking at the gills on this one. And some areas are like have this little bit of pink. So I'm just following that, what I see there. So like as you layer, you see now this is really blended, which I actually think looks quite okay for this area. But I lost some of the lines. I think it's nice to have it be a little bit softer in some places. So I'm gonna leave it like that. So, okay, I think I'm finished. Also don't want to overwork it. How are other people doing? Okay.
Not sure if it's a mushroom.
Oh, it looks like a mushroom, Ellen.
I'm gonna, so we have a little time if people want to get feedback. So if you want feedback, hold up your painting to the camera and then you have to talk so that you get the view.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Can you see?
Wow. Yeah, I think it looks really nice.
No, you're so nice. I think it's terrible.
I think you could add a little bit more like the brown to the leaves
Okay.
at the base because it looks a little bit like hair right now.
Yes, I just used ivory black.
Yeah, but the color is really nice.
Oh, thank you.
Here's mine.
Oh, nice. Yeah. I think you can, yeah, you have maybe a little bit more work to do on the gills. But
Yeah.
otherwise it's looking quite good.
Thank you.
Good job with the layering, keeping the paint transparent. You're getting that blending effect.
I'm not sure I know where the camera is. Do you see this?
Yeah.
Yes. Wow. You've done a great job with the dry brush, Ellen.
Oh, thank you. I always have a lot of problem with contrast. It's usually not enough.
Oh, well, the contrast looks very strong here. The contrast looks quite good, I would say.
Yeah, I went back in many times.
Yeah, I think the contrast and the texture are both really great. I think that the color could be a little bit more purple, but I mean, if you just saw the painting without seeing the photo, you would never know that. So I think that's also.
Okay, thank you for your help. It was a really very intriguing, wonderful class. Went so fast.
You're welcome.